Welcome to the official YouTube channel for the Colin Cowherd podcast. Go on, hit the subscribe button. There you go, right down there. If you want to be among the first to hear my weekly takes, NFL, college football, more, right there. I want to talk a little bit about something that makes being an NBA GM very difficult. It's very unique to the culture. So in football, most of your star players, and almost all players, Jason, get in line with the coach, the culture, the system. There's not a lot of pushback. It's not an independent sport. I mean, even Brandon Ayuk will go erase his social media stuff, but he's a Niner. He wants to be a Niner. And the NBA is different. And there were almost no offers for Kyrie Irving out of Brooklyn. He was toxic. It was February 5th, 2000 was at 23, no offers. I mean, Brooklyn, you had the vaccine situation. But this is why Kawhi got a big contract. Jimmy Butler, who had bounced around in Miami, this is why Kyrie's going to get one. Because if you can get that player that's transcendent and you just get him in the right frame of mind, you get trophies. And it's as great as the basketball talent is, man, Jason, there's like 8 players on the planet that are just different. And I'm watching Kyrie in traffic, and I'm like, there's no comp. I don't even know what that is. He's better than Isaiah offensively. He doesn't shoot like Steph, but he's better around the rim in traffic. He's better with his left hand. I mean, like, when they made the move, I said, well, you got to get Luka somebody, and nobody wants to give you a great player. You're going to have to swing because nobody's going to say, oh, they've got Luka. Let's give him another great player or you're done. What was your initial thought when they got Kyrie?
I loved the deal. I one of the things that really bothers me about the way that deal is looked back at is like super risky. And like, don't get me wrong, there was a certain element of risk. And I loved your opening. I think it was your open on the Herd today where you mentioned like Pat Riley getting Jimmy Butler. And it's like, yeah, that was a dude who was mercurial and was like got in fights with players at practice. And it was obviously like a very weird type of ego. And he's been amazing in Miami. LeBron James is a guy like if he did leave the Lakers this summer, which I don't believe he will, but there's been some reports like maybe Phoenix is interested, maybe Philadelphia is interested. You don't think if you sign LeBron James at a veteran minimum, it's going to come with a lot of additional stuff like media, like a lot of like just drama over the course of the season just by virtue of his star power? That's like part of the risk is just bringing in that type of like real big personality into a locker room, right? The part that bothers me about the way the Kyrie thing was looked back at is it made so much sense to me at the time because of why he was requesting a trade. He wasn't requesting a trade because he wanted to leave KD. He wasn't requesting a trade because he just wanted a change of scenery. He was in a contract year, and Sean Marks wasn't going to give him a new deal. So he was heavily incentivized to go into his next situation and bring his A game, both on the court and off the court. It was like, if there was a time to buy Kyrie, that was the time to buy Kyrie. It made a ton of sense. And like, and honestly, looking back at it, I remember saying this at the time, loved the deal. They just needed to nail some stuff after the fact, and they did. They went into the summer. They got the sign and trade for Grant Williams, which ended up being a vehicle for them to use at this year's trade deadline. They got Derek Lively, who has been, I mean, we're underselling him on this show. He's arguably better than Gafford. He's a better passer on the roll. He's a better defensive player. Like, he's an incredible player. And then obviously Daniel Gafford in the deal, PJ Washington in the deal. We talked about the veteran minimum signing of Derrick Jones Jr. He's probably the best veteran minimum signing that any team has made in the league this year. Like, they nailed the stuff on the margins after the fact and tied it all together. And what it really comes down to is this, and this is why why I love the risk. When you have real superstars that can do the really hard stuff to replicate, like, to your point about TJ McConnell, love TJ McConnell, played against him a few times at Arizona. He legitimately is like an awesome competitor, a dude that's really fun to watch. But yeah, he's not going to be able to get a bucket against a really locked in Celtics defense, right? Like, the really difficult to replicate stuff Kyrie can do. So then
Right.
by virtue of having Luka and having Kyrie, you can then go get players that are specialists, and specialists are easier to find at discount. And from there, you can
Yeah.
build out a roster that where it's like, hey, I don't need you to, come off of this dribble handoff and make decisions in the lane the way that KCP does for the Nuggets. I just need you to guard Anthony Edwards and go stand in the corner. And the only way you have the ability to do that is if you give Luka a legitimate secondary shot creator. It made a ton of sense that he obviously got dragged through the mud for good reason. He got dragged through the mud there for a couple of years in Brooklyn. Wasn't just the COVID stuff either. He was like ghosting on Steve Nash without telling him. Like he just go celebrate his sister's birthday for
Yeah.
a week and like just leave the team. Like he was bad. He did a really bad job, but he had learned behind the scenes that he would pay the price by virtue of him not getting a new deal from Brooklyn. So that was the best time to buy. I thought Mark Cuban made the right risk there, and they've nailed everything since then. And the rest is history. Here they are. They're going to be in the NBA Finals.
I've wondered for years why Dallas isn't a greater destination or a more alluring destination for free agents. Never have a 5-hour flight if you play there. You're right in the middle of the country. I mean, if you're playing in the Pacific Northwest or the West, you got 5-6 hour flights all the time. It's a winter league. It's not Phoenix or Miami, but it's doable winter weather, 40 degrees, 48, 52 when you land. No state tax, beautiful women everywhere. I always, somebody once suggested that Mark Cuban was such a prominent star as an owner that he could take some of the appeal off star players, that Europeans didn't mind that. European Dirk and Luka, they don't want the press. But sometimes an agent wouldn't send his domestic star to Dallas because Cuban is such a star. Plus, it's a cowboy town. So people have suggested, but I sometimes I'll watch pro athletes and they'll, like when Justin Fields says, I want to play for the Steelers. And I'm like, you already had a defensive coach. You don't want another one. You're going to be a backup to Russell Wilson. That's not where you want to go. Kirk Cousins goes, I want to go play for Atlanta because it's got a great O-line, offensive weapons, and a crappy division. And I look at some of these players and where they go, and I'm like, why don't more guys go to Dallas? I do feel like most European players, we've talked about this, Jason, would rather be loyal. Like they just rather stay and they don't want to bounce around the league, I mean, it's almost like they feel like they want that one. They love their homeland. These guys are on a Gulfstream.
Yeah, season's over. They're gone.
Yeah. Over. They're gone. And they just want a second home. And that's where they get drafted. They don't want to those guys bounce around Europe. I mean, Europeans travel because of their train system. They travel more than we do. Those guys bounce around their country. That's what they know. They come over here. They want to keep it simple. They want to play in San Antonio, Dallas, Houston. They don't want to bounce around. So for Dirk, I felt like there was so much disappointment until he finally got it. It's if Luka can win a title, boy, Dallas could be really good for a long time. I think there's a lot of guys because you know what? Sometimes it just takes a catalyst. I mean, Jokic now, you look at Denver, this football market, this hockey market, whatever. It's like, oh no, it's going to be for a decade, a basketball market. And it takes certain players that, whether it's the Georgetown Hoyas with John Thompson, sometimes in college, the coach is the catalyst. But I mean, would you sign Kyrie if you had to sign Kyrie has he signed an extension or?
I think he has like 2 years left on his deal. I'll pull it up really quick. But yeah,
that's what I think it is. But my takeaway is, if you had to sign him, would you extend him for 3 and 4 years?
So he has a player option after next season. So they have him locked up for one additional season. And here's the thing. It all depends on his level of play. Like right now he's 32 years old. So it kind of just depends on whether or not his body holds up over the course of the next season. Now, my thing is you find out pretty quickly that the gap between a Kyrie Irving and then like a league average replacement guard, someone like a Andrew Nemhard, is like a huge gap, and it's really hard to make up for that, right?
Huge.
So my thing is like you want to set yourself up for. You talked about you said one of the easiest ways to win is being a dynasty, and one of the first things I thought when you said that is like kind of like what Michael Malone was saying after they lost to Minnesota, which is like, you kind of, it's more about getting 3 and 5 or 4 and 7. And what that means to me is like, sometimes you catch a bad matchup. Sometimes a guy gets hurt. Like Jamal
That's
Murray
right.
had a calf
That's right.
muscle issue this year, right? So like sometimes there are just things that break your way or don't break your way. Like for instance, Dallas didn't have to face Denver out of the Western Conference. It's very possible that if they ran into Denver, they could have lost that series, right?
That was a bad matchup.
Exactly.
Yep.
And so honestly, the way I look at it, like you just want to make sure that you're in the mix multiple years in a row because something might break your way. And like if it breaks your way, all of a sudden you're in the dance, right? So like again, the way I look at it, I think they'll obviously retain him just simply because you could trade him at that point if you wanted to. Like if you sign him for a 2+1 and then he's like, halfway through the first year, he's either declining a little bit or maybe Luka gets hurt or something. Like you can pivot. In my opinion, it always makes more sense to retain the star because you can trade the star. Like every once in a while, someone screws up. Like look at Zach LaVine. Zach LaVine makes too much money. He's not good enough. Nobody wants him, right? And and Zach LaVine's
Yeah.
an interesting player. He just makes so much money that no team would be willing to sacrifice what it takes to bring him in, right? But like every time there's a star that needs to get traded, they just find a way to trade him. And so when push comes to shove, I think he'll end up just re-upping and then maybe getting traded to a certain destination when the timing's right.
Yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting offseason. I think Paul George is fascinating to me. I think he could make Philadelphia really a handful. And I think he works in New York. I just don't think he wants it. I think that, Ballmer's the richest or second richest owner in the sport. He's opening his new arena. He's not letting guys go. And Paul George, I mean, first of all, you have to be an alpha to be an NBA player largely. Even Jason Tatum or Anthony Davis, they may not be, like the supreme alpha, but these guys are driven, competitive as hell. I if you had to predict one big move, I just think Paul George is going to
Mm-hmm.
stay. Here's the other thing. I think Golden State is now kind of understands Joe Lacob's one of the wealthier owners. I think they sort of understand like this. We tried to bridge old and new, and they're not going to bring Chris Paul back. Probably his name's getting bounced around. I think the Warriors are going to be a big player somewhere. I think we're concentrating on Philly and New York, and I understand that it's just a much easier avenue to get to the conference finals and the finals. Like, there's no disputing that. God, how good is the West going to be next year? But I think Golden State, full of smart people, Jason, looks at OKC, looks at Denver, looks at Dallas. It's like, come on, we're not even close. We like you said, there's a big gap between a Paul George and your average good wing defender. Paul can really dial it up. So I think teams like Golden State are like right now, we're all talking Klay Thompson, Chris Paul, what to do. I think they're going to take a huge swing. That's my get. Maybe it's Karl Anthony Towns. What do
I
you
think so
think?
too. I think Dallas is the perfect example of why you should take a really big swing. I was actually talking about this with a buddy of mine, Samus Fondiari, who covers the Warriors. And like, I was talking about it with him this morning. Like, Dallas is the perfect example of why you look at your current situation with Steph Curry and you go, wait, if we bring him a second star and we hit like one or two moves on the margins, we could be right back in this thing. Like Dallas missed the playoffs last year. Like they literally missed a 10 team playoff field. And it's the same two stars. They just made a couple of tweaks with specific role players as long as your two stars work. Now, to your point, there's a lot of fun stuff to talk about this summer, like Paul George potentially going somewhere. Like, I would be lying if I didn't think it'd be fun, even though I don't think it'll happen, to see a LeBron James go to Phoenix and play alongside Kevin Durant, Bradley
Right.
Beal, Devin Booker, those sorts of things. I think this is going to be the summer of the move of the tier 2 stars. So, like, I think you'll see a Darius Garland move somewhere. I'd love to see Darius Garland in San Antonio with Wembanyama. I think that'd be super fascinating. I think you'll see a DeJounte Murray get moved. DeJounte Murray's a guy who I think would make
Yes.
Golden State a
Yep.
really fascinating team. If you gave Steph a real athletic backcourt shot creator next to him that would fit, I think, really well in their 5-out attack the way that the way that they go. I think you'll see a Mikal Bridges get pulled into like Mikal Bridges is a guy that you might see with the New York Knicks, or you might see get moved
Yep.
to one of these teams. And so I think it's going to be the tier 2 guys that move. But again, if you don't think about them as like real needle movers, think about them as guys that would offer support to existing tier 1 stars. It's not DeJounte Murray in a vacuum.
Yeah.
It's DeJounte Murray next to Steph Curry. It's not, Darius Garland in a vacuum. It's Darius Garland next to Victor Wembanyama. It's those are the types of moves that I think could have sizable impact. Kyrie's a big name, and Kyrie has a lot of like star power behind him, but like Kyrie's not a guy that's regarded as a top 15 player in the league. He's just in the perfect role for him right now. Secondary shot creator on a team where they have somebody that can guard. He doesn't have to guard the other team's best guard. He doesn't even have to be the guy that runs the offense for the majority of the game. He can play off of Luka. And how often have we seen Kyrie in this playoff run like chill for 3 quarters and then come in to start the 4th quarter and be like, all right, let's go. I'm going to attack this game. So like, again, I think that those kinds of moves, there's a tendency to always be like, does that really move the needle? Does that really move the needle? I see that so differently. Like, to me, basketball is more art than science. It's not about accumulating talent points.
No question.
It's not about accumulating talent points and like, oh, we hit the magic score of we have enough talent on the roster. It's like, no, you have responsibilities your team needs to fulfill on the court. And if you bring in a really good player that can take a bunch of those responsibilities, it even takes your other role players and makes them play better because now they don't need to do as much. Like to me, like that sort of thing. A lot of people overthink that. It's like, that's why I'm a big believer in the thing that you always preach, which is like, take those risks. If you're close, take the risk. Dallas put it all on the line this year by trading that first round draft pick at the deadline. They have all of their eggs in this basket. And you know what? It might have failed. Maybe PJ Washington doesn't get that foul call on the corner 3. Maybe you head back to Oklahoma City for game 7 and you lose and OKC advances and then everyone calls you idiots, right? But no, that's not what happened. And here they're going to go to the NBA finals. And so like, I love it. I wish more teams would do that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think it's hard sometimes where taking big swings, first of all, you have to be built for it. You have to be like Miami can do it because of their history and their legacies. For the Mavericks to do it, Mark Cuban, moves out. So you have new ownership. You have a relatively new front office. Luka's kind of a new star. Dallas deserves a lot of credit to just say, we're going to take some big swings here. But I also think there is an advantage because when you're in a market with the Dallas Cowboys, and even the Texas Rangers and Sark and the Texas Longhorns, Dallas Stars now are good. I do think there's something to be said about competitive markets. I think over the course of my life, I've watched New York teams sometimes be too aggressive to keep up with the Yankees and the Giants, right? Like too aggressive. And I think Dallas, the advantage to being the Mavericks is when we make little mistakes, people don't pay attention to them. They pay attention to the Cowboys, right? That's a cowboy town. So you're allowed to be a little bit under the radar in terms of national scope and even local scope because you're in a Cowboys market. It's like being in Philadelphia. The Phillies are huge. The Sixers are gigantic. The Eagles are big, right? Like you're all sharing that. And I think Dallas, they had the Dirk title. Cuban made them incredibly relevant. And not that it's easier to take swings, but they weren't the Warriors. They weren't the Heat. They weren't the Lakers or the Celtics brand. And so I think that they were really smart swings, really smart, thoughtful swings. And I think we all win on that stuff. I say this even in football. The advantage in football, if you take a big swing and miss like Russell Wilson, is the draft provides you so many good players. I mean, like the story now is Bo Nix is just crushing it for Denver. Okay, you got the quarterbacks all one class. Whereas, the NBA draft can give you Lively to the Mavericks, but he's been terrific. I went and read his draft preview tonight as I'm watching the game the other night. As I'm flying, I'm reading it, and I'm like, oh, he was going to be they said, good backup player, nice little passer. I mean, they really marginalized him to like a 6-minute-a-game guy, and he comes in and he's a factor. But it's harder to take sometimes chances in the NBA because you don't get bailed out by the draft. You just don't. And so the guys deserve, when you take these big swings, these GMs deserve credit. There is no safety net, you know? Russell Wilson, it's a year later. Well, we got one more year of dead cap. We're done. All right, we're done. And so what Dallas did takes some cojones, and I think and they've been rewarded. I think swings for me create content.
Oh, for sure.
And
we love them.
so I just want swings.